Hi, everyone, and welcome to China EVs and More, where my co-host Lei Xing and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Lei and I discuss today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. If you enjoy this room, please help us get the word out to other enthusiasts, and of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I am the managing director at Sunnyvale Insights, a global management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sunnyvaleinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Lei, half vacation, half work trip. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning from the West Coast. This is your co-host, Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review, and this is episode number 105. I'm here in LA. My daughter's on her winter vacation, so this has been an interesting week. We started off...
Lucky you, because it was ice storms the last couple of days here. So
it's a family vacation that we usually take, I guess, during her break out to the West Coast to visit friends. And then midweek, I took a break from that to attend the Mercedes strategy update on their MB.OS operating system, software stuff in Sunnyvale. And now I'm back, and I'm driving a Tang EV, BYD Tang EV, that BYD has loaned me for like 24 hours to kind of experience it. Yeah, and then I'm taking a red eye tonight to the back to the East Coast. So I might need your help on some of the China.
Well, there's a couple things going on, but not really, because one of the big news was this morning. I found out about it last night. We can talk about that. It has to do with Ford China. But yeah, so no problem. We can support each other on this on this pod.
Yeah, let's get Ford China out of the way first, because you had commented that changes were coming.
Yes.
Here they come, right? Basically, let's see. Yeah. What's your take?
So a little bit of history for everyone. When I moved to China in 2010, I spent about a year and a half in Beijing and did the tourist visa thing. So every 3 months I had to leave, and I wanted to see if China could be home for a few years. I wasn't married at the time. I was dating my current wife, my only wife. I shouldn't say current. I should say my only wife. And so we wanted to figure out whether I could thrive there. And so after about a year of touring Asia, I started looking at opportunities, and Ford had hired me in Shanghai, in Lujiazui. So their headquarters was in Thailand, if you remember, Lei. And then they moved, their Asia headquarters was in Thailand, and they moved it to Shanghai. And it's right on the Pudong side where the river is. So it's where you see all those pictures of those high rises. It's right there. So it was a great location for me. And it was my first real experience of living in Shanghai. So Shanghai is now one of my favorite cities in the world. But I went there and worked, and some of the guys that you now recognize as the CFO, the head of Ford Blue, they were management for, at that time, what was called Ford APA. I still have at least a handful of people I keep in touch with that I worked with while I was there. I was only there about a year, and they wanted me to move to either Nanjing or Thailand to work in another department, and there were some things going on family-wise, and so I ended up quitting and just moving back to Beijing to take care of some family stuff. And so I have a personal connection to the Ford team in Asia, and it kind of messed me up because once Lawler left, once Kumar left, there was a void. There was a gentleman that actually took over Luo. I forget his
Jason
first
Law.
name.
Yeah.
Jason
That
Luo.
lasted like 7, 8 months or something.
Yeah, I don't think more than 7 or 8 months. And he actually became one of the co-founders for ELMS,
Yeah. Hmm.
Last Mile Systems or something like that. But they ended up being kind of blowing up, what, 2 years ago, 18 months ago? And so after Jason left, there was no GM for China for about 4 years. And we had documented this, and I documented this in the newsletter 1 or 2 weeks ago. In 2016, there were over a million units. 2015, 2016, there were over a million units in sales, with Lincoln really, really with strong growth. But because of the lack of leadership and the market really moving a different direction, and Ford historically having a challenging relationship, one of the most that I knew of, in Lay, you tell me if there are any other legacy SOE relationships that are more difficult, but Ford has a very difficult relationship with Chang'an. And so the the pivot, the lack of funding, the lack of products, and we are at 2022 where, and I had said, I think under 300,000 or around 300,000. I think it's closer to 400,000 units they sold. So within 5 or 6 years, they lost more than 50% of the share that they had in the mid 2010s.
Yeah. Dropping off
So
a cliff, basically. Mm.
yes, yes. And but Lincoln was growing from a small base, but it was still growing, just like Cadillac. And Anning Chen came in about 2 years ago, right?
2018. So
And this
2019
was
is when he announced the Ford 2.0 strategy
right.
in China. Yeah.
And this was his second stint because he came from Cherry, I believe.
Yep.
So I think there was relief among the local staff because he was Chinese. He could fluent. He's obviously fluent in Mandarin, and I think speaking with my old colleagues, they felt a sense of relief that he seemed to be a long-term solution for China. And so I pinged a couple of people inside, outside of Ford last night and this morning. A couple of them said that they weren't surprised. A few of them said that this was part of the plan. I was told differently. So I was told that Anning had some difficult relationships with some of the management in Dearborn. And so he is retiring. And his right hand man, Sam, I forget his last name,
Woo.
Sam Wu, is taking over. So there will be some continuity because Sam has been part of the team for a while. So I think that's good. But at the end of the day, Ford's challenges in China are more than just management. They need product because the Mach E, which I believe that they were really, really leaning on to become a good seller for them and to build momentum off that, has not had the sales that they were hoping for. So, Lay, I'll let you fill in any blanks that you think I've missed.
That was a pretty good 5 minute history of Ford China. But I just think someone had to go. Someone had to be the scapegoat.
What did
And
you hear about this? Anything?
one thing I find interesting is from the press release. It's all been Jim Farley being quoted.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see that very often when there's a change in China, like the top leader in China. So I think in that perspective, it's like when when you're a coach on a team and you win a championship, and then after that you don't do anything, then you have to have a change at the top, right? I think that's what happened at Ford.
Just really quickly, in all fairness to Anning, I would be screaming too,
Yeah,
asking for more investment, asking for more product. So I would be a thorn in Dearborn's side as well,
yeah,
because they had two products that they launched in 2019 or 2020, sorry, the EVOS and the Lincoln Zephyr Reflections, both only at that time for the China market. Unfortunately, they were both petrol engine vehicles because if anyone cares to Google Lincoln Zephyr Reflections, it's a beautiful car. It looks great. And the hard pivot to EVs in China corresponded with those two cars launching. And I think they sell okay, but it's not going to be the saviors that they were hoping for.
No, I think they were great products on paper, but the Chinese consumers really did not accept them.
Ford's brand is not super strong in China.
No, not anymore, or not what it used to be, as you
They
explained.
loved the Chinese, the younger Chinese consumer loved the Fiesta, really loved the Focus,
And the
and
Mondeo,
then
even
yeah, and everything
for
else was
years.
kind of mama hoo or just okay.
Yeah, and also I was gonna say that last year, Mao Jinbo, the president of Lincoln China, left to become now she's the president of Lotus China,
Yeah,
right? So that there's a sign of the management.
that was obviously a good move for her.
Yeah, and also Sam Wu, he is a outsider. So he came to Ford last year from Whirlpool and having spent time at Osram, Honeywell, and General Electric. And General Electric, I believe, wasn't Mei Wei Chung, wasn't he, didn't he go to General Electric after Ford?
I think so.
Right?
I recognize that name.
And I think a couple of quotes that was put in the press release, I think worth mentioning from Jim Farley was one, he said, as we move with speed to continue the remaking of For China. So that's one sign. And the other one was strategically, China is the center of the EV revolution. So understanding and being relevant in the segments we're prioritizing there, especially innovative connected EVs, is essential to extending Ford's global EV leadership. So it feels like the man, the CEO, the global CEO, I mean, these quotes should be coming from the China people, but it seems like Jim Farley, he even knows more of what's going on and what should be done than right. So uh,
What have we been talking about for the last 18, 20 since we've launched this podcast?
yeah,
It's that the decisions that Ford makes in Dearborn are a reflection of what's going on in China. I'm not saying that their global strategy starts and ends with China, but they can't be successful without China. And so to be spinning your wheels for so long, I'm really surprised that they're still able to get 500,000 or close to 500,000 unit sales out of the China market, because I can't think of any products that were flashy enough to get the attention of the Chinese consumer. And so my guess is some of the lower tier cities are still buying the Ford product, but I don't see many of new ones anyways, because there's Fords on the road in Beijing and Shanghai, but not that many new vehicles. So
yeah, I think they. I don't see any clear indication that I mean Ford specifically as a one of the foreign legacies. I don't really see them turning the tide anytime soon. I mean,
no.
we're even talking about Volkswagen having the headwinds, but right,
And the two EVs that Ford has thrown out front, one of them, they can't be sold, or they can be sold, but they can barely be driven on Chinese roads, on the Gaosu, on the main roads. And I know we've mentioned this in past podcasts, Lei, but could you remind our audience that F-150s, Silverados, they can't be driven on main roads, I think?
well, they need to have the covered. What do you call it? The back.
Like the tonneau
Yeah,
covers,
yeah, the
I think.
covers in order to be driven. So yeah,
So you don't see many. You see F-150s like every once in a while. It's like seeing a unicorn. I've seen some Raptors. I've seen some Dodge Rams, but
that's officially imported into China. The Raptors.
and they're expensive because of the gas guzzler stuff going on. But do you think Chris is going to be at Shanghai?
Jim, you mean?
I mean Jim. Sorry.
I think so. I think if any of these foreign legacy global CEOs are not in Shanghai, then it'll be ridiculed. So we know Oliver Boom is there. Ola Kalinas, he's going to be there. In fact, he's planning to spend more than 2 weeks in China. So I spoke to him at the Mercedes event. But I think a lot of these global CEOs are coming.
So I've told friends here that if they want to experience and understand what's going on, they should work my media contacts, but also other execs at tier ones and tier twos, because we expect the OEMs to be there. And to your point, I think not being there would stand out quite a bit. And so I'd mentioned to a lot of my contacts, if you want to see the EV revolution, you have to be in Shanghai for the auto show, because it'll be the first chance in 3+ years to get all of these executives in one place, because it wasn't the Detroit Auto Show where you saw everybody. So I believe the Shanghai Auto Show is going to be the first time where you're going to see many, many executives from the foreign brands and the tier ones and tier twos, because outside of upper management, and I'm referring to global CEO upper management type levels, the other management team members have not been to China likely. So this will be their first time in over 3 years going. And you and I know that China time in 3 years is like 15 years in any other country.
Yeah. It's going to be a coming out party for sure. Yeah, since April, I mean, I attended the last Shanghai Auto Show in 2019, so 4 years almost.
Let's do this, Lei. Let's have you talk about your trip so far and what you've been up to.
Well, I mean, I mentioned Mercedes and Ola, so we probably go there.
Okay.
Sunnyvale, it became Windyville, as there's been some weird weather here on the West Coast. We're actually getting blizzard warnings in the mountains.
Holy cow.
So it's supposed to rain all day today, so I'm not sure if my trip back is going to be affected or what. But anyways, so Mercedes, they had their the strategy update that they started doing since October 2020. So this was their fourth strategy update since that time. So they did it at their North America R&D Center in Sunnyvale, which interestingly is right next to Innovusion. just a couple of blocks away and not too far from Baidu, Google, and all these.
Let me grab 30 seconds. So for those who aren't that familiar with Silicon Valley, Sunnyvale is in the heart of Silicon Valley. It's between Santa Clara, San Jose, and Mountain View. And Sunnyvale was where where Yahoo is headquartered. It's right next door to Cupertino, where Apple is. I know Sunnyvale. I lived in Sunnyvale for almost 7 years. And so it's the burbs, but it is the part of the heart of Silicon Valley. And you are not, where you're talking about, Lei, you're not more than 5 miles from Intel, from Sun, from eBay, from Apple, from Google, you name it. They're all there. Amazing Vietnamese food, by the way. And so if you're wondering why does Mercedes have operations in Sunnyvale, it's because you're in the heart of Silicon Valley. So sorry, go ahead, please proceed.
Yeah, so the fourth strategy update, the first, I think, was they talked about those 6 pillars of changing the company. The second was when they announced that they're going to be all electric by 2030, where market conditions allow. And the third was, I don't remember what the third, but I thought this was their most important one yet, because it's about software. And I'm not going to
You mean the event?
Yeah, the event.
Right.
On their MBOS, right? So basically this MBOS is rolling out with their MMA platform, which is the entry luxury platform. It'll be announced at end of 2024 and then go into customers' hands in 2025. So over the next 18 to 24 months, it's going to be really crucial for them to get this operating system and software right. So I guess the question...
That's an impossible timeline, by the way.
Right, but so the E-Class being unveiled soon has what they call this 0.8 version of the MBOS with the third generation MBUX. So the MBUX was announced at CES 2018, so that was the first generation. And then the second generation was the EQS with the hyperscreen. That's
Yep.
the second generation, and now the third generation coming with the new E-Class. But see a lot of details talked about. But I think I asked Magnus Osberg, the chief strategy officer, who, by the way, came over from Aptiv.
I thought that was the McKinsey guy, the
No,
chief strategy.
no, software.
Oh, software.
Yeah, I'm talking about software. The chief strategy officer is Paul Gao, who came from.
Yes.
He was there too, but
For the company.
yeah. So, and if you, one of the news that happened today was Jidu signed a deal, strategic cooperation deal with Aptiv in China. And Aptiv, is they have this smart vehicle architecture. So I now I kind of can connect the threads that this Magnus, he came over from Aptiv to lead software at Mercedes. And I asked him, the industry basically questions, and we do as well, that can the legacy automakers do software right? And can Mercedes get software right? He said there's three factors that he feels Mercedes can get this right, which are number one, this clear commitment to EV. So Mercedes, in addition to Volvo, are right now the only two traditional OEM that has made the announcement, the commitment to go all electric by 2030, right? So that was number one. And number two, he said that they could focus on this so-called ODD. So focusing on the digital luxury, so certain segment, unlike Volkswagen Group, which has to cover different segments and different brands. And then third is this kind of the commitment in the whole organization. So Olaf was here, Marcus, the CTO, Magnus, CSO, Paul, the other CSO, marketing sales, lady, Britta, CFO. Virtually all of their board members were there. So I think this is the first time that I don't ever see that any legacy automakers has gone this much into detail about a strategy on software and operating system.
And let's remind everybody, Lei, that Mercedes has a much cleaner path because they only have two brands, effectively. They have commercial truck, but from a passenger vehicle standpoint, they have Smart and they have Mercedes Benz. So that speed that Magnus was talking about, I think it's more doable than when you compare it to a GM or a Volkswagen that has multiple brands.
That's what he was getting at.
But again, they effectively are doing all their R&D in Silicon Valley. None of it is really going to be done in any significant way in Germany, I don't believe.
Well, here's an interesting thing that I think Ola said when I talked to him, and he said the local R&D capabilities within China. So they have now their newest R&D center, tech center in Beijing that opened like a year ago, I think.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That was like
I remember that.
I don't know. I think that was like quite a huge investment. And now they have another R&D center in Shanghai. And he said the local capabilities in China can develop a complete vehicle.
It has to.
Yep.
Because it's not going to be for the rest of the world. It's going to be for China.
Well, he said China for China and China for the world. But that's a very diplomatic way of putting it.
That ain't up to him. That ain't up to him. It's up to the European Union and it's up to the U.S. government.
Yes. But basically what was announced was Google, right? Google, NVIDIA, Luminar here on the deepening of collaboration to help them. But in China, interesting that they're using AMAP for navigation and Tencent Cloud for what they're trying to do with this software.
Let me pull out my decoder ring here, Lei. They're not helping. Google is not helping them. NVIDIA isn't helping them. They're doing it for them.
Yes.
Because in 18 months, they can't create an operating system, roll out an operating system that is bug-free for their vehicle architecture, along with an infotainment system, because there are layers to this software and hardware stack. And if they're using Tencent Cloud in China, are they going to use Tencent Cloud in Europe and the United States?
No.
Likely not.
No.
And so You and I know that, but let's make it clear to our audience. The US government wouldn't allow them to do that, not with servers, unless Tencent in some way, somehow built server farms in the United States and the European Union, which I don't believe they have currently. Maybe, but outside of that, there's no way that. So the level of complexity for their vehicles is going to be really, really high. If they can find a partner for where they're buying that would match Europe and the US's requirements, that helps. But if there's three different solutions for three different regions, oh man, it's going to be very, very tough for them.
It's more like China and outside of China, basically. So really two regions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and,
Yeah.
and that's the optimal solution. But when we talk two regions, the rest of the world region is effectively American companies. It's effectively American high tech companies. It's not any European high tech companies. The other thing that I'll remind you is that, and you know this, but I'm saying this as much for the audience. Aptiv was Delphi. Aptiv wasn't a tech company. It was Delphi. So they didn't come from the software hardware side. They came from the analog automotive side. So they do have new management. So we'll give them credit for that. But again, they are starting with processes and policies from the automotive space, not from the high tech space. So and the first thing I thought of when Jidu and Aptiv kind of made that announcement is like, where does that fit in, and how does that overlap with Baidu? So a little bit confusing on that Jidu Aptiv thing, but
Yeah. But what I wanted to say was back to that question of can the legacy automakers do software right? I still don't think we have a clear answer yet after this Mercedes update, but at least they presented a roadmap on how they plan to do it. So in that sense, I haven't seen any other traditional, including Volkswagen, by the way, who has a carrier unit. I haven't seen any other legacy automakers go into as much detail on all of their, all the different board members talked about how the OS and the software are helping in their respective responsibilities. So in that sense, at least there's a path, but whether you get to the final destination smoothly and get it right, that still remains a question, I think.
But let me unpack this a little bit further, because I want to give Mercedes a ton of credit. To your point, they firmly committed to EVs, connected vehicles, and the software leading the way. Okay. But the timing works because they're not building it themselves. And we talked about this in previous podcasts, where every automaker is currently looking at every piece of software as a make or buy decision. And if Google is helping them, Google sees all that data from their customers. If NVIDIA is helping them, NVIDIA sees all that data from their customers. And I have to point back to the Chinese government looking at internal combustion engines and objectively looking at themselves in the mirror and saying, we're never going to catch up to the Germans and the Americans. So we're going to create a whole new electric vehicle industry. So do we believe that not only can they successfully launch with their partners, Google, NVIDIA, TikTok, and Aptiv, but can they, so they're building the plane as they fly it because they don't have the software capabilities, not to the level that they need them. And you can build a team, but will it be good enough in 3, 4, 5 years to where you don't need a Google to help you with maps and an infotainment or an app store? Because that's ultimately the question. You can get to market with a bunch of partners, but can you end up booting them out because your internal team is good enough to compete product by product, service by service with a Google, with an Apple, with an NVIDIA, with an Amazon, with a TikTok? That ultimately is really the question.
Yeah, in the long term. Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think that they can put the band-aid on right now with the Google? And because let's assume that those software or those services are going to be fairly bug free, okay? And let's also assume that Mercedes can create the user experience that integrates everything into this premium experience that you said the Chinese EV makers have now really stamped as their own, correct?
Yes.
Because marketing my infotainment system, you can download TikTok, is not an experience. And so that's ultimately what I'm wondering.
It's yeah, right. I think they talked about this. It's more about the UI, not only the ability to use something like a TikTok, but expanding that to fit the let's say the MBUX and the infotainment, which by the way, the infotainment domain is one of the four, and that Mercedes Benz talked about. There'll be this part of the new MBOS, and the entire infotainment was done by the domain was for the new ECAS was done by Mercedes. I mean, Ola clearly said that they don't plan on to do everything themselves, and they can't do it that way, not efficiently, not cost effective. So it's like you said, yeah, it's a matter of balancing, who to work with and what to do yourself.
The one thing, and you bring up a great point, because it is the UX. And the one thing that scares me is that their first try was this huge, huge, obscenely ugly coast to coast screen for the
Yeah.
EQS. And if they believe that to be a premium experience, they need to fire that designer or those designers, because it's not.
Well, no, I mean, it's not so much about the coast to coast screen, but it's about presenting, again, going back to the UI of accessing, presenting the information and how to navigate that more intuitively. I think that's I saw a little bit of that. They showed the interior with the third gen MBUX. I think is much better than what we're seeing right now in the market. And they actually even showed a preview of the MMA MBOS. It's a step up. I think it's definitely a step up in terms of intuitivity. So
good, because that was the big concern for me, is that they it's 2023 and they brought like a 1990s UX to the party. So I appreciate Mercedes Benz more than I appreciate a Volkswagen, because they're a bit more humble. They seem to be more heads down, and they know the challenges ahead of themselves, and they're realistic about it. Whereas a Dees, even a Bluma, is kind of talking like, oh, we can do this internally. We can do this ourselves. We can reorg the teams, blah, blah, blah. And you can't, not in the time frame that you need. I don't know if they can do it full stop, if they can compete against an Apple or a Google on building software. Now, can Apple and Google design the software so it's optimized for a driving experience? That's going to be Apple's and Google's challenge. And so, but they're working on it. And what we'll likely see in the next 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years is Apple really partner and Google partner with one or two brands to just take over the interior of the vehicle. That's what we're going to see. But no, great download on the Mercedes event in Sunnyvale. I think it's important that they do update people. And I see a bit more optimism out of you from what you saw this week. So, but without seeing the Cariads and the GMs and the Fords, do you think directionally Mercedes and the timing that they've outlined, do you think that's fitting? Do you think that's going to work?
it looks good at this moment. So at least I think Mercedes definitely facing lesser headwind than
Yes.
Cariad because of the group of brands in different tiers, whereas Mercedes can focus on the digital luxury, right? Oh yeah, the third strategy update was when they announced the focus to put more focus on luxury. So they're getting rid of some entry level models. So they had that top end core entry, 3 different tiers of their brands. But and by the way, they showed a sneak preview. We couldn't take pictures of the Mercedes Maybach EQS SUV, which will make its global debut at Auto Shanghai. And that's a model specifically, there's no question about it,
For China?
for the Chinese market.
Oh, yeah, because they'll sell a ton of them.
Yeah, because Maybach, I mean, they're the number one market. So, and then I think they're still focusing on that part of the segment. And once that MMA comes out in 2025, I think they're, even including Volkswagen, they're really banking on the second half of this decade on whether they can get everything right,
Yeah.
software operating system wise.
Did they say anything about the IRA or anything about building locally in the United States?
Ola said right now the China-US relationship doesn't affect them. There's not really any, I mean, he didn't say anything specific. There's continuing to invest. By the way, the high power charging network, Mercedes is talking to, let's say, a similar partner as what they announced in North America. So there's a company called the MN8 and ChargePoint. So they are discussing with potential partners in China to set up that HPC network, which globally, by the way, is 10,000 locations. So he kind of said, if we talk about the markets, regions, China, Europe, US, you can sort of say it's a third. But yeah.
But the third needs to be much sooner in China and Europe for now than it does in the United States.
Well, I think they're starting out with the US first because the US, the discussions have been finished. And also because of the White House,
Okay.
the statement on charging, right? So,
and I've been thinking about this for the last 10 seconds, 15 seconds. I want to clarify a couple things because I don't want folks to think I'm dunking for no reason. But when you Frankenstein a hardware software stack together and it's not native like a Tesla where a lot of the software is from the internal teams, you don't have to work with outside suppliers too much and license software into the vehicle. It makes for a cleaner code, which leads to less bugs. And so it's not just that Mercedes is going to be building the operating system, which seems like a tall task, but also if they're using NVIDIA as the GPU or the brains of the system, NVIDIA has its own firmware. And so the operating system needs to work with NVIDIA's firmware. And Google has specific code. And so when you Frankenstein all that stuff together, you have many more opportunities for bugs. And then you multiply that out. And so when Lei is looking at the instrument panel or the front console of these new cars at the event he was at, that's one prototype that works really well. Now, multiply that out by the 3.5 million vehicles or 2.5 million vehicles that Mercedes has sold in China, in the United States, and in Europe. There's a lot. The opportunities for bugs increases significantly because now there's external factors that you're not able to engineer out. And so that's why I feel a bit less optimistic about how the legacies want to deal with this. Now, with Mercedes specifically, they've admitted, hey, we can't do this ourselves. And so I'm giving them full credit for that. But when there's hardware and software and software from multiple parties being thrown together, it creates for a clunky experience. And so Johnny Ive famously said, simple design is really, really hard. And he used software from his internal team. And so hence Apple's user experience is best in class for phones, in my opinion anyways, for personal computers. And you've become a convert on the Mac platform now, Lei, because everything just kind of works. So that's the ultimate goal, where you're not getting these pop-up windows for some random reason and then reading like, I have no idea why this pop-up window came up. And so that's the ultimate frontier. And what the tech companies can do is make that seamless for your entire day, because Google knows what you look for. Apple knows, and Apple's all about entertainment and productivity, and then Amazon knows what you buy. So guess what? This is really the final frontier. We don't know what we're doing, or they don't know what we're doing when we drive. And with L2, L3, we're going to have some time on our hands eventually. So guess what? That's why Google and Apple wants to be in there. So I just wanted to clarify that it is really, really, really hard to create a bug-free hardware software stack that can continuously work, and you can't gain those skills in an 18-month time frame. So that's what I mean by, and we just look at the Chinese EV companies. The first hires were hundreds of software engineers. It wasn't auto guys, it was software engineers. So anyways,
And the other thing to mention is huge stamp of approval on Luminar LiDAR. And Ola said they looked at everybody, and he said Luminar was the best that they could find technologically on what they're trying to achieve in terms of level 3 at speeds of up to 130 kilometers per hour. That's what they're developing now with the second generation of the Luminar Iris LiDAR, which the first generation is supplied on the Rising Auto R7 and the Volvo and Polestar SUVs. So I thought that was interesting.
did he say that Luminar will be a global solution for them?
No, he didn't. He didn't say that. I think this is more. They decided. They announced a strategic partnership. I think in 2021. So that was decided then, and this is just to announce a deeper. Yeah. So it'll be interesting.
We might have to ask Luminar about that.
Yes, I'm going. I'm going to the Luminar Day next Tuesday, I think.
All right, man. So you got to ask those tough questions.
Yeah.
So
Especially on the Chinese competitors. LiDAR.
it is 10:54, Lay.
And we haven't talked about Geely and BYD yet.
Yeah, so we can open the room up for anyone who has any questions, but let's talk about Geely Galaxy.
You know, I don't have. I just want to say that Geely Galaxy has BYD's bullseye written all over. I mean, from those posters, from announcing the brand, not even the brand, that it's a series name. It's not a new brand. It's still branded Geely with that new square thingy logo.
It's a sub brand. It's a sub brand, I guess.
Yeah, you can call it a sub brand, but it's not like it has a new logo or badge. But it's called the Galaxy. You know, poking fun at Yangwang, right? We talked about that. And then the L7. Here's the 7 models they announced that they plan to launch.
It's nuts.
7
models.
Yeah, within the next 2 years. So within the end of 2024. And then you kind of compare with Ford early on in the show. What does Ford have, right? When you compare it to a Chinese company brand announcing that many models in one shot. The L7 is clearly directed at the BYD Song Plus. So Song Plus, I think last year sold about more than 300,000 units, including the PHEVs and the EVs. So roughly 20% of BYD sales last year. That is the model.
High runner.
Yeah, that is the model that this L7 is trying to target. And the other 6 models are all, I think, has this BYD in mind, I think.
Front end of the L7 looks like the G9.
Yeah.
The Xpeng G9.
The price positioning of the Galaxy is between 150,000 to 300,000. So Zeekr is above 300,000. And the geometry, they still have the geometry, it's below 150,000. So that's their price positioning of this new Galaxy.
And geometry is a fleet. They sell a lot of fleet, and they sell to the lower tier cities quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I don't think, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe geometry would see Southeast Asia perhaps, but I don't see it exported to Europe or the United States or anything.
So I think it was basically everything was directed to BYD, from the branding, from the model lineup, products, even focusing on PHEVs, which I thought was interesting. Yeah.
The one thing about Li Shufu is he seems to be chasing instead of leading. And that's what kind of gets me a little bit. because they have enough brands to be successful. I think that any more complications would make it very difficult for them to focus and be successful outside of China. And so they need to be really careful about that stuff because if you're the CEO of Galaxy, if you're the CEO of Zeekr, if you're the CEO of Ling & Co., you're going to want to be exporting cars. You're going to be want to have a lot of budget. And that was one of the big issues back in the day with the GM because they had so many brands. And guess what they did? They closed Pontiac, they closed Oldsmobile, they closed all these other brands that they had. And so I feel Geely is getting close to that. We have too many brands because they have Radar, they have this Galaxy sub brand, they have Geometry, they have Geely, they have Zeekr, they have Lotus, they have, what am I missing, Lay?
Polestar, Volvo, Smart.
Yes. Holy cow. And they only have enough money to fully fund X number of brands. And so it's a little bit different with Volvo and Polestar because they're publicly traded, but they're still going to be fairly controlled by Geely, I think. So challenges.
Yeah, I think the biggest risk going forward is we talked about this the three models from Volvo, Polestar, and Lotus.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Lotus. They have Lotus.
They are extremely overlapped, I think. So I think it's a real risk. I wouldn't be surprised if there's, a bit of.
If I was the Polestar CEO, I'd be upset because you knew,
Yeah.
or you already knew the Volvo thing.
Yeah.
But for them to come out with the Electra, and I think it's great. I actually think the Electra is going to do really well in Europe. And so, but it's going to do well at the expense of the Polestar 3, probably. I don't think both of them can coexist and grow significant sales together. I think that's kind of what you're alluding to a little bit, Lay. It's going to be really interesting to see how they position themselves because does Geely have any say in that? I don't think so. Because if I'm Lotus, I want complete autonomy on how I position myself in the market. And with Polestar, has to be the same way. With Polestar, at least they do lean into that technology forward, Scandinavian design forward. But then you creep into Volvo a little bit too. So I think Volvo, if I'm looking at it without them telling me, I think Volvo is positioned more family friendly than a Polestar, maybe. But I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. They should hire us to figure out that positioning. But
just a lots going on at Geely.
Yes. I want to catch up to my friend to see what I'm sure he's busy as hell. So
yeah.
But what did you want to talk about, BYD?
No, I just the BYD Tang EV I'm driving. I think one of two or three here in the US.
Yep.
So courtesy of BYD lending me this since I'm here. I think it's their latest generation Tang EV. It's got 300-mile range, I believe. So it's roughly 300 mile, 500 kilometers, 300 mile, right?
差不多, yeah.
Yeah. So I think from a design, from a space, ride perspective, it's great. But there's these little details that I told, the people who dropped off the car, simple things as the charging cap. When you push it and it pops up, it's really stiff. It doesn't feel. So I told them about this. These are little details that you need to improve. And the interior, it's nice, but
it's just okay.
Yeah, it's okay. And I think the UI part of it, there's a lot more to be optimized. Just the feel of the materials. But driving on the freeways, I think steering, handling, it's great. It's not that much different than the Model 3 that I rented. But I think some of the recuperation, so when you let off the gas pedal, those can be optimized.
Oh, the regenerative?
Yeah, regenerative thing. But I mean, from a design, from spaciousness, it's great. I think Tang is a great car for the US, but I think it's far from, let's say if we, probably VinFast may be a little bit better, but even VinFast has some issues, right?
Well, VinFast is still theory in the United States. They haven't delivered any cars yet. So
Yeah, I think there's still a bit of ways to go for really for the BYD, for the Tang or the Han to really to put it on the market. I think there's a lot of improvement to be made.
but in relative terms, Lay versus 10, 12 years ago, it's night and day.
It's night and day, exactly.
And I agree with you because I forget which one I got. The SUV, I got to drive the SUV and I got to drive the sedan. And I thought everything was good. It wasn't great. I thought the fit and finish of the materials of the interior weren't going to wear very well.
Right, right, right.
Not durable is what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, I find that as well. I think that's a major area of improvement that's needed.
And that can be next model year kind of thing. That doesn't need to be a 10-year thing. I think they can affordably improve the fit and finish of the interior pretty easily. And we know that BYD focused primarily on building capacity for its battery cell manufacturing and its vehicle manufacturing. So one of the things that they neglected, to your point, was the UX and the interior and how the software interacts. I think it's decent. I think it's okay. I think it could be better. And it makes sense for it to be better because they've sold so many cars. So I still see that as a major opportunity. But again, depending on the price, and we had talked about this before we started the show, if it was affordable, sub 45,000, I think it would do pretty well.
One thing I think BYD and some of the other Chinese EV brands need to do is really balancing having too much in front of you in the cockpit versus too simple. Let's say a Tesla style setup. I
Or a
think that
Polestar.
yeah, I think that needs to be balanced a little bit. And then navigation didn't work because I had to use my phone. Yeah.
Do you think that's because they're using a Chinese HD?
No, it's just because the system is different.
Yeah. And just a reminder to folks that the Chinese consumer loves connected stuff. So if it's a Chinese vehicle, it's going to lean towards too much from an infotainment and front console standpoint than too little. And so I think Lay, and I don't want to speak for you, Lay, I think you're referring to maybe a little bit too much. Simple, but not Spartan, I think is what I would describe it as.
Yeah.
Yes. So
a lot of work to do for BYD or any other or even Neo if we're talking about that wants to sell the cars in the US. Lots of work to do. That's what I want to say.
But that's a lesson learned from the Fords and the GMs and the Volkswagens. There's never truly a global vehicle that you can plop down as is in Europe, China, and the United States and sell a bunch of them.
As you will hear from our upcoming Max episode with Sylvia and Gory, that's exactly his central comment on Chinese EV going global.
But let me also say that, especially when companies lean more into software, it's easy to deactivate features that are popular in China when you sell it into the United States, as opposed to starting with a simple design and then trying to incorporate features specific to certain markets. So we can just literally turn off or not load certain software and certain apps and things like that to make it simpler. But again, that also means that do we need, and this is where user experience, and this is where I'd love to sit down with Frank Wu and be like, what are your considerations for this and this, right? Because back in the day, we would just add a button or add a knob or do something. But with the UX, if we're 3 layers deep, we want to be able to do everything we need to from a navigation standpoint through the user experience, because your iPhone, I don't know, I might press it 2 or 3 times, maybe 4 times at the most to get to an app or get to a feature that I want. So that's what people expect for a vehicle, maybe even less because you're doing this while you're driving.
Yeah, and that's what Mercedes is trying to solve that problem by having this thing called zero layer that what you want to access. You don't have to go into second, third menus to access, what you want to access, right? So
Yeah. And really quickly, back in the day when there were all these knobs and buttons, designers would design for a single use case, and they would add a knob, add a button. But when you have software, you have all these different setups. And so when we say layer, we mean how many times you click something. And if you click it 4 or 5 times, chances are it's too complicated. And so I'll give you an example, like Amazon and these e-commerce companies on websites, they have a buy now button, because what they found 15, 20 years ago is if I had to click something 5 times, I'm going to abandon. I'm not going to buy from that website.
Yeah, exactly.
So now they have those buy now buttons, and it's a one-click thing because they want to simplify that.
Yeah, I do that all the time. I just buy.
Right?
I don't look at anything else.
And you agree, right? It's time off on, or it's like too complicated. You're like, oh my God, I can't deal with this.
Yeah.
So anyways, but why don't we end the show, man? I think this was a good chat. This is a good one, I think.
Yeah, it's been an interesting week. So to a little bit of vacation, a little bit of work.
My kids have been off for 3 days.
Oh, okay.
Because of ice storm. So
yeah, I saw that ice storm. Yeah, and then
oh my God,
it's getting crazy. Yeah,
I was at a startup event yesterday. It was an all-day event. There were 9 startups that presented, and so I can tell you about that offline.
Sure,
we can talk about that offline.
And hopefully next week we should be back to our normal 3 p.m. Thursday.
I hope so.
Unless, it's all fluid, right? Yeah, sometimes you get these like calls or projects or things.
We're busy people, man. We're busy
people. Yeah. See, because yesterday, the reason that we didn't do it yesterday because I took my daughter to Universal for all day. So we went to that Super Nintendo world.
How's the weather?
No, yesterday was actually, it rained in the morning, but it was very cold by LA standards. And there was some clouds and sun. So, but the good thing is that not that many people. So, worked out.
How's the Nintendo? Was it good?
That's one of the biggest IPs, right? Then the ride was actually pretty good with the AR glasses.
Oh, okay. Oh man, I guess I had to take my kids out there again. But now what we're thinking about is summer camps. Anyways, we can talk about that offline. So
yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
Thanks everyone for joining again. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We will talk with you all next week.
Same here.
Have a good weekend.
Likewise. Bye-bye.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.